So first off, I'm Saswat Panda, CTO and co-founder of Livelike. We do virtual reality live sports. And today I kind of want to talk to you guys about kind of our experience developing for mobile, kind of what we've learned about the industry, as well as the application development process, the design and development process. So a little bit about myself. Prior to Livelike, I used to be a game developer engineer at Microsoft, working on in the Xbox division, and I quit Microsoft and kind of started this with a couple other folks. So I guess I'll kind of start off with a brief history of VR, really brief, since I'm sure you guys know about this. So VR has been around for about 40 years, but it was really only in 2012 that the Oculus Rift came out, or the Kickstarter campaign for it started off. And that kind of, it was pretty revolutionary because till then VR had been kind of in the realm of science fiction. And in 2012, when the Kickstarter campaign came out, people realized that this is something that's actually A, possible, but B, also around the horizon. So it was a really exciting time. And then in 2014, Google came out with a cardboard, right? So it was a cardboard box. You can take any phone and just put it inside that, and you have, you have a pretty impressive VR experience, right? Something you would not have imagined a phone would be capable of doing a couple of years prior, right? And cardboard was revolutionary because it actually opened up the possibility to take this market, right, and actually expand it to basically anybody who's a mobile phone user around the world, right? With the Rift and other tethered VR devices, you kind of have to have a gaming rig, but cardboard showed that anyone could actually be able to experience VR, regardless of what price range they were looking for, right? And to give you an idea of like how big cardboard has been, Piper Jaffray, an analyst in predicted that in 2016, by the end of the year, there would be 11 million VR headsets sold. And then by the end of 2020, it would be about 100 million. But the Google Cardboard app itself has been downloaded about 15 million times just last year itself. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scale and just kind of how fast and how rapidly that sort of market is growing. So I'll kind of start off, just a little bit about like the state of mobile VR. So, the cardboard, from a technical perspective, all the cardboard is an SDK, right? You use the SDK to create your own VR app, which you could do within Unity, or you could kind of do it natively on Android. The thing about it though is that as most people that know VR will agree, cardboard is pretty much the worst sort of VR experience you can have, right? It's got really low, it's got really high latency, which makes it really sickening really fast. And so just the fact that there's no peripherals, the latency is bad, it really makes it for a not very immersive experience. But at the same time, it's buying a cardboard box can be anywhere from like $2 to $10, right? And so it's a really affordable sort of way to get into VR. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the Gear VR, which released in 2014 as well, I believe, which actually has sensors built into the application, right? And it retails for about $100 and is only available on Samsung phones today. The difference between these two headsets is that on the cardboard, what you have is you have a really high latency, which is a high latency between the input into the accelerometer and the output, which is what you see on the screen when you're moving your head around. That ends up being on the average phone about 8 milliseconds. So every frame, if you want your app to run about 60 frames a second, you need about 16 milliseconds of latency at the most. And cardboard, just for sending the data from the accelerometer to the processor, takes about half of that, right? And so because of that, you end up having a really bad latency. The Gear VR, the sensors in the Gear actually reduce that 8 milliseconds to about 1, which makes it a lot more feasible and practical to have 16 milliseconds or 60 FPS sort of experience inside the application. Another really cool thing that the Gear does that isn't there in any other or no other mobile VR device that I know of is this thing that's known as asynchronous time warps. The idea is that you could have the game thread running at about 60 frames a second, and even if your graphics thread ends up taking like a lot longer than that, the game thread the game is able to kind of use frame from the previous render cycle and actually generate kind of sort of an extrapolation of what you should be seeing. So this demonstration kind of shows you, like, imagine if you had, a graphics thread that was stuck at, one frame every 10 seconds, right? But you're still moving your headset around. This is kind of what you'd see. And as you can imagine, this actually results in a lot smoother VR experience, and actually minimizes, that sort of pukey feeling. And so in 2016, what we're going to see is, with the Gear VR, you have all this cool tech, but it only exists for Samsung, and it only exists on those high-end phones. We're actually going to be seeing improvements across the spectrum. So, for example, in software, the time warp that you see on the Gear, once cardboard experiences end up kind of having better performance, you're actually going to see time warp kind of implemented on cardboard. You're going to see improvements in the SDK for cardboard, as well as Oculus and all sorts of other mobile VR SDKs out there. On the headset side, there are rumors that Samsung is working on a new Gear that's going to have positional tracking. So it's not going to be like full-fledged positional tracking. It's going to be very light. So you move your head a little bit and it feels like you're there. You're sitting on the couch, right? And Google's apparently working on a competitor to the Gear as well. So hopefully sometime this year, they're going to be releasing something like the Gear that works on every Android device. Again, speculation, but it's quite possibly very true and very happening this year. And then finally, there's also improvements in the chipsets. So Qualcomm is releasing the Snapdragon 820, which basically improves performance by about 40% and really minimizes that latency. So the newer phones that come out are actually going to have these chipsets in them, and you won't need a dedicated VR device like the Gear necessarily to have that sort of optimal experience. So all of that being said, why mobile VR? So I touched on one of the reasons initially, which is that mobile has everybody has a mobile phone, right, around the world, and a pretty significant percentage of the population actually has a very powerful phone, right? And so what mobile VR allows you to do is actually reach a much bigger market than you would with traditional sort of tethered VR experiences. The other thing also is that if you're a new developer, you're just starting out, mobile is a super easy way to kind of get started, kind of get understanding what exists in the VR landscape, kind of design methodologies, development principles and whatnot. It's super cost effective and super easy to do that. And another reason is that if you're building an experience that's kind of low revenue per user. So for example, high revenue per user would be AAA game that you spend like $60 on, and something like that you could easily release on a gaming platform, right? But if you're releasing an application where you only expect users to or expect to get about $1 or $2 per user, you probably want to go with something that's more mass market, right? I mean, that being said, mobile, as you all know, has its limitations. Like I said, it's cardboard, for example, is the worst sort of VR experience you can have. The Gear actually does a pretty good job, but it's nowhere close to the immersion levels of the Oculus, the Morpheus, the Vive. And the truth is, it's never going to get that good, right? Correction. It's going to get as good as, someday it's going to get as good as, the other tethered headsets are today. But mobile, will never be the same as tethered headsets, at the same moment in time, right? And so it really depends on who your audience is, what the market is, what your revenue methodology is, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to kind of jump into what we do at Livelike to give you an idea of kind of the sort of challenges that we've tried solving over the last year, and then I'll jump into those. So, So we started Livelike about a year ago, and the goal was that we really wanted to kind of give sports fans kind of the ultimate sports watching experience by combining the best of the stadium, TV, and the second screen. And one of the reasons that we really started working on this was we realized that existing sports VR applications were basically just large TVs strapped around your head, right? So 360 video, right? Or 180 3D video or whatnot, right? And that's really cool, and it's great for the first 5 to 10 minutes that you're watching the game. But after about 5-10 minutes, it gets kind of tiring, and it gets kind of boring, because for the most part, as a sports fan, except in very special occasions, most of the games you're watching with friends around you, right? You're doing other things. You're talking to people. You're on your phone. You're on your laptop. and you're constantly doing other things besides just watching the raw video that's playing on your TV. And that's really the sort of problem that we set out to solve. So I'm going to play a video of the experience. So the idea is, you take your phone, put it inside a mobile VR headset, and then you're at the game where you can watch, a live game. I'm going to mute this for a second. Where you can watch a live game in your very own VIP suite. And you might also notice that we have a large jumbotron that we've augmented on the field. More than that, we allow you to watch the game from the best locations and live the best sort of the best moments, kind of the optimal locations in the field. We also have multiplayer, so you can kind of be in the game, watch it with your friends, no matter where they are, so they don't have to be physically next to you. We have localized audio, VoiceOver IP, and we give you access to kind of the most pertinent statistics, replays, and other sorts of info that you would find useful or care about in the game that you're watching. So we kind of had an option of kind of developing for two devices. I guess first, we wanted to go and focus on mobile. The reason is that we wanted to build our app, and we're building our app for sports fans, and sports fans and kind of the people that buy expensive gaming rigs don't really intersect as much as a market, and so we kind of wanted to make this mass market. So mobile was kind of the main option for us, and we had the choice between the cardboard and the gear. We ended up going with the gear. Because initially for our early experiences, because as I mentioned, it's much better performance, and when we and our business model is actually B2B2C, so we actually sell our application to broadcasters, and for us the gear made a lot of sense because we could just go to clients, investors, kind of show them our application, and actually show them like how smooth it can be and how great an experience it can be, even on the cardboard. And the idea is that we're not building a company, for 2016. We're building a company for the next 10 years, right? So it was a great way, and it still is a great way to kind of show people the future of what mobile VR really is going to be. Another interesting thing is that as you probably know, there's no standardized input system for VR, and that rings true with mobile as well. So you have the gear that has a trackpad and a back button on it. And the cardboard, cardboard has one button on it, and I've actually come across cardboard headsets that don't have any buttons on it, right? And so you kind of have to design for multiple different potential input systems. At the same time, cardboard, because of the performance issues, the cardboard experience was only really designed to be sort of like a less than 10-minute experience, right? You don't have straps on your cardboard. And so, and Google intentionally did that, so you don't actually put it on for a longer period of time and puke your guts out, right? Whereas the gear, you could use it for 60+ minutes if you're used to it. I use it for about 2 hours on a flight when watching movies and whatnot. So just to kind of give you an idea of the sort of two headsets and the comparison between the two of them. And so we started off with the gear, but one thing we've kind of realized is that you can't just build an experience for the gear and port it over the cardboard just because of these sorts of limitations, right? Especially the experience length limitation for the cardboard. If you're building like a 2-hour experience for the gear where you can watch a soccer game for 90 minutes, that experience is not something you can directly transfer over for the cardboard. For the cardboard, you need to create something that's much shorter and kind of gives a lot more bang per minute. So something to keep in mind. So design learnings that we had as we kind of went about with this with our application. So the most important thing is that, as you guys are aware, VR is super new. There aren't really any sort of set precedents for how you go about developing UIs or user experiences. And more than that, every device is different and every application is different. So you can't really take what one application is really doing and directly transfer it over for your application. So I'm going to give you an idea of the processes that we went through and the things that we kind of went through when we came up with our with the UI that we have right now, and it's still an evolving process. So the first one is iterate frequently. So the first challenge we came across was how do we have users interact with their UI system. Since we were doing the gear has the trackpad, and so we figured people can look at UI elements in the scene and just tap on the trackpad and select them. The problem is when we started doing demos to new users, that was something that was completely, really hard for people to grasp. Even if you showed them where the trackpad was, once they put it on, they would have a really hard time finding it. I believe the new gear might have solved that problem, but I'm not sure. And it was also kind of cumbersome for more advanced users, because when we tried out longer tests, we saw that people would actually kind of hold onto their headsets and kind of hold onto the trackpad and try to click around, expecting that something's going to happen in the UI. And when you're building a 90-minute game experience, you don't want to kind of have people holding onto their headsets in any way, right? You want people to be sitting back on the couch, enjoying the experience. So then we tried, something different. We ended up, trying a gaze-based UI. So you have UI elements, in your scene. You look at those elements. They can have a timer. In some cases, you don't need a timer. In some cases, you have a timer, and you activate them just by looking at them. And that sort of UI system actually worked great initially. We got a lot of really great feedback. Customers, users really loved it, found it super intuitive. We didn't really have to explain to anyone, how to use the system when they first put on the headset. And so that was great. But, soon once our app started kind of having more and more functionalities in it, you kind of started to see cracks in there. And the problem is that with gaze-based systems, like, once you look at something, you start the activation process, right? So for example, you see this, point of view switching icon that you saw in the video. And when you're looking at that, that's when the sort of activation process goes. And the problem is that once that happens, like, users kind of, they kind of try to, force direct their head away from these sorts of experiences, these sorts of UI elements. And that is not something you want users to do, right? When they're sitting in that experience, or in your experience, you want them to kind of freely move their head around as if they're actually there, right? So that was one of the sort of problems we started seeing. And in this case, with the point of view switching UI, we often have people that would accidentally kind of switch over a different point of view as they're kind of looking at a game that's going on in the field. So now what we're working on for our UI system is actually more of a sort of two-step process. So for elements that, aren't sort of, for simpler elements that don't really affect the game experience, you can look at them and activate them, and that's fine. For example, switching tabs on the table. But for something like, switching different camera angles, we try to make it such that you look at the icon and then you have other options that show up, and then you select one of those. And that kind of makes it a lot less likely that you'll make a mistake. Again, this is stuff that's very much in flux. I don't believe this is something we'll have by the end of the year. We're going to probably have a completely different system. But the important thing is that you try out something new, you take it to a bunch of new users and have them play around with it and kind of get feedback from how they what their experience is and how they're able to navigate around the UI. Another example is kind of our table interface. So we've had many sort of many iterations of the interface. Initially, when we first started out, we were like, okay, the table is going to be your dashboard for everything, right? You have this like really cool like 3D model of the stadium. You can see players running around on it. You have a TV screen with replays. And the thing is, we started developing that. We kind of built out a very basic prototype without, non-functional. And we realized that that sort of interface design gets really, really cumbersome and really, really noisy. And so then we kind of move towards something that's, a lot simpler. You have, your tabs on the left. You can kind of, scroll through them. And each tab kind of has pertinent info for the current game. But as we started exploring that more, as we started adding more and more functionality, we realized that, a system like that doesn't really scale up. And as I mentioned, we have the multiplayer system. So when you have multiplayer, that problem gets exponentially more complicated. For example, you have, the question is, when you're watching a game, does each user have their own UI interface, or do they actually have a shared interface? Do they share certain elements of the interface, and how does all of that work? So all this is very much a work in progress, and we're still kind of, iterating towards that and trying to figure out, what the right approach is. Sorry. And then another thing that kind of rings true in, I think, any sort of VR experience, even on PC or on consoles, is that you really want your UI to kind of be part of the environment, right? You want to make it as implicit as possible, and you don't want to throw sort of interfaces and stuff in people's faces, right? This is really important because if you're developing a mobile app, right, and it's badly designed, you might still be able to get people to use it if it's functionally great, right? You can still have Craigslist on web and people still use it, right? But for VR, once you're basically expecting people to take their reality and swap it out with your reality, right? So everything that's kind of in your world, now becomes theirs, right? And so if there's anything annoying about the experience, that can be a huge turnoff and can almost be a deal breaker for users. And so it's really important to kind of have sort of a UI that's kind of built into your environment and kind of has the right affordances in place. And what we do at Livelike is we kind of look at, we're all gamers here. And so we look at, existing games we've played and stuff, and just try to figure out, what are the different elements that they use. So two of the examples we really like are Mirror's Edge, for example, which is, a game where you're just jumping around from building to building, kind of running around on walls. And you'll notice that there's several different colors there. You have the red, the red objects, which are, I believe, stuff you can run on, and orange, I believe, actually blue, I believe, which you can kind of wall run on, right? And when you're in the experience, you know exactly what to do and, like how to go about doing that. With Journey on the left, throughout the game, you kind of have this like mountain that's kind of in the background, and that's kind of the end goal, and that's where you want to be going. Like we're again still in the process of trying to figure out what the right way to go about doing this in our application is. But every application is different, and it's something that you kind of have to really, really think about and really spend some time researching. And then I guess the development setup that we have on our end is actually relatively straightforward as far as application development goes. So we built our app in Unity. We started with Unity about a year ago, just because back then Unity had the best support for the year. I believe Unreal is kind of caught up and is a great alternative as well. And for mobile, we kind of use the Oculus SDK for the gear, and then the Cardboard SDK for iOS and Android. And the third sort of software we use is Photon today for our multiplayer system. Again, our multiplayer is like super basic right now, so we don't know if this is a system that's going to scale to the way we want it to, be, in the future. But it's definitely something that's super easy to set up, and we've kind of, had, that's kind of what we use today to showcase our demos and whatnot. Another thing about VR, mobile VR, is that, a lot of people don't realize it, but mobile VR is actually really, really challenging to develop for. Which makes it all the more rewarding if you're an engineer like me. So, for example, on mobile, you kind of have your VoIP sort of applications. You have Skype, you have Hangouts, right? And they do a really good job of that. Well, maybe not. You have your social networking solutions like Facebook, Twitter. You have video streaming apps that stream like up to 4K video, like YouTube, Netflix. And then you have games that can render 3D environments on your phone. What's really technically challenging about doing something in VR is generally you're trying to combine all of these different elements, right, or several of these elements into one application that's running on exactly the same device, right? So in our case, we have multiplayer, so we have the social network as well as the sort of VoIP solution. In addition to that, we're playing back really ultra HD video. And we're rendering all of that in a 3D environment. And worse than that, in VR, you kind of have to render, one pass for each eye, which means that you have to optimize the crap out of your experience to get it to be at 60 frames a second, right? So it's kind of one of those sort of major challenges that people will face in VR for a while. And I think anyone that kind of solves or figures out a way to kind of have these SDKs that work really well. With existing VR, with other VR applications, for example, a VoIP SDK, right? I'm sure Facebook is coming out with a social network SDK. Would make things a lot easier for the mobile sort of ecosystem. And finally, I guess before I wrap up, I came up with a couple, very short list of sort of resources that you guys can use. To get into VR, mobile VR development. So the first section, the getting started, I mean, if you guys are used to Unity, it's super easy. Like it'll probably take you like 15 minutes to set up a cardboard app on your phone. If you have a Gear VR, you could try the Oculus SDK as well. And then there's a great talk by John Carmack from GDC last year where he kind of ran through the state of mobile VR and kind of where it's going towards. And Oculus has some great guidelines for how to go about developing a mobile VR app that that carries over towards cardboard as well. Then there's an article on UI UX that kind of is the motherlode of all UI UX articles I've come across. It's a list of I think 20 articles or something. Definitely worth checking out, and it'll really give you a good holistic idea of where thinking around VR is at the moment. And finally, the social VR tutorials that we followed from our friends over at Converge. It probably takes about 15 minutes to set up, and you can have a multiplayer mobile VR experience really quick and easy to go. So I think that's about it as far as the talk goes. Happy to answer any questions you guys have. So the question is, are you dealing with the phone overheating problems in your development? The answer very much is yes. Like I said, we're trying to do a lot of things on one phone, right? Multiplayer, voiceover IP, audio encoding and decoding when you're doing VoIP, 1440p to 4K video streaming, and playback. And all of that has a crazy perf hit on the phone. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think our if we do a soccer game at like the highest resolution video, I think it runs for about 20 minutes as opposed to the 90 that we want to get to. If we do HD instead of Ultra HD, it ends up being about I think like 45 minutes, which actually is not bad, or about 40 minutes, which isn't bad because for soccer you can kind of use the the same. You watch the first half for 45 minutes, turn it off, and watch the second half. But again, these overheating problems are actually issues that are being solved by the chipset manufacturers. So you might have noticed that the S6 actually had far less overheating problems compared to the Note 5, just because of the way the phone was designed. And Qualcomm with their Snapdragon 820 is actually aiming to further solve these problems. So the chipset manufacturers, I mean, they've dropped. I think they've increased performance by about 40% while solving a lot of other issues as well. So it's a problem that manufacturers are aware of, and our goal is to kind of create that experience so that it's something that's viable in the long term. Okay. Another commenter mentioned that the S7 has gas or liquid cooling, so it's becoming less of an issue with better APU, GPU, CPU, and loading. I did not know that, so thanks for that info. We're just waiting to get our first S7. Yeah, so iPhone users being left out of VR development. The Cardboard SDK, I will say that the Cardboard SDK actually does work for iOS, and we do have an iOS app. One of the reasons we've stayed away from it is just because, for example, I have an iPhone 6. The resolution on the iPhone 6 is about half the resolution on an S6, which just doesn't make it as great a device to kind of demo on. So even though we know that iOS is something that we're going to be going after long term, and we have to go after it, right? It's kind of the biggest market, or will be potentially the biggest market. It's something that today isn't great for sort of for VR. So I guess to answer your question, you can still develop for iOS today. Cardboard, Unity, all of that works on the iPhone. It's just that over the next couple months to year, we'll see a lot more happen. There's rumors about Apple potentially coming out with their own VR solution. I would say it's probably going to be sometime early next year, not in 2016. Let's see. All right. So someone asked, do you have any plans for football fans in Turkey? Our solution actually started off in Europe. So we're working with a bunch of European partners that I can't name right now around like soccer events in Europe. And we definitely, we're doing in the UK, we're doing stuff in in France, and we are looking at other locations in Europe as well. So Turkey might be in the roadmap as well. Let's see. I can use ShineCon for 30 plus minutes. It has much larger lenses, but no magnet button. I'm not sure what exactly that is. I'm going to take a look at it. It sounds like it's a cardboard like headset. So thanks for that info. Fender versus Gala in VR. If that's a sports reference, I'm sorry, I don't actually get it. Let's see. Do you guys have an example we can see? What sort of example are you guys looking for? I'll probably get to that in a second. How are you delivering content to users? Are you streaming from cloud? What are your current challenges for streaming? Lots of challenges. We're trying to do UHD streaming now, which is not something that most people do today. We're trying to do it for live, which is, again, something not many people do today. And we're using next-gen codecs like H.265. Which is, again, something that if you have to do 4K or 1440, you kind of have to use next-gen codecs. Otherwise, most people will not see your streams. Actually, I don't even know if the internet can really handle transmitting that data over existing H.264 codecs. So current challenges to streaming really, it's kind of figuring out like what sort of encoders. Like for us, we actually have equipment that we use at the source. So we have our own hardware encoders. And as far as packaging services go, we've tried using Wowza in the past. We're looking into other packaging services that are more robust. And we use Akamai for our CDN. And I mean, it's definitely something that, the sort of streaming providers are starting to get accustomed to and starting to get a lot of infrastructure around. Do you need to worry about any native app development when building mobile VR apps, or is it all in Unity? That's a great question. When we first started out, we were a very small company. We still have like basically two developers on our front end at the moment. And so the goal was to kind of get up and running really fast. And what we've realized is that the big downside of Unity is I mentioned this, the kind of optimizations we need to do. And Unity is not really the greatest sort of tool if you want to be doing that. But at the same time, it allows us to move really, really fast. So we're able to prototype new interfaces really fast, new designs, new experiences. And so Unity is kind of something we do plan on sticking to for the foreseeable future. Maybe one day, once our application gets to the point where it's not sustainable, we might develop native or try something else out. Do you guys have a VR sample we can watch on the gear? Unfortunately, not. We don't have rights to the content, so we work with broadcasters and they own the rights, so we give them the app. They distribute it to their users, but we can't directly do that. Are you working with all sports at the moment? Yes, all stadium sports. So we just had a tournament. We just had an event with ATP, the Association of Tennis Professionals. So we've done tennis, NBA. We've done soccer. We've done rugby. And we're actually looking into other sports as well. So, for example, golf or NASCAR or F1 as well. So hopefully anything that's kind of in an enclosed sort of environment that translates over into our experience. And then you mentioned sports. We're also looking into esports as well. It's a very different product, so it requires a very different set of challenges, devices that we're going to use. We're not going to necessarily do mobile VR for esports. So how would you acquire telemetry data or positional data for cars and then fit that into a VR Unity experience? So another great experience. All sports actually have third-party data providers that they use. So for soccer, we have data providers like Stats LLC, Opta. Broadcasters kind of subscribe to those guys, and so because we're going through them, we just use their sort of subscriptions, their license, and have that sort of data in our application. That's what we do for soccer today. When we start going into like NASCAR, for example, it's going to be a very similar sort of thing where we just access those third-party APIs. It's just data that we then can visualize in interesting ways inside our application. Any current plans to expand partnership to other countries for live broadcasting? So we will have it in Europe, definitely. Oh, Digiturk, we are talking to them. So definitely our sales guys are on it at the moment. Spain, stay tuned. We might be doing something really cool, but I won't mention anymore. Yes, someone said that is weird. Most Note 5 have less overheating problems than the S6. I think you meant the Note 4. That is absolutely correct. The Note 4 was horrible as far as overheating is concerned. S6 was better, and then the Note 5 is better than that, which kind of lends itself to my sort of statement that this is something that's going to keep improving. It's something that manufacturers are focusing on at the moment. iPhone VR, yeah. I hope so too. I'm really looking forward to it as well. Let's see. Have you tried hand tracking, example, leap motion? We kind of were thinking about trying it, but we realized that again, we're trying to go mass market, and even for mobile VR, like we don't expect most people to be buying hand tracking sort of solutions along with their VR headset. So we try to design for the sort of the minimum set of requirements. And that's kind of what we've been doing so far. Perhaps in the future, when headsets have their own sort of hand tracking or finger tracking or systems built in, we might actually end up doing something like that. Someone mentioned the ShineCon again, so maybe that's got hand tracking in it. I'm not sure. I'm going to take a look at it after this. Example, beta version of the app with the recorded footage. I'm not sure what exactly that means. Could you break down the main stages of development for your sports viewing app and anything you would do differently in hindsight or the future? Great question. So let's see. I mean, when we first started off, everything was really chaotic. So to explain kind of how our team works, we kind of started off with a creative, my co-founder is a creative director. Myself, I'm kind of a game developer, joined as a CTO. And so the way we initially started off, when it was just the two of us, is that we had other folks on the business development side. So we kind of had, the business actually validated before we started working on the prototype. But as far as the product goes, we ended up kind of, Jeremy would come up with designs. We'd kind of, test it out inside the app. And depending on how things work, we try something different. And the problem is we had this like really grand vision of how different things would work. And I think the mistake we did is we didn't actually I don't think we followed a very structured approach towards reaching that grand vision. Instead, we were like, okay, this broadcaster wants this, so let's build this into the app. Or this client wants this, this is going to be a really cool demo to show to investors, so let's just build this into the app. And so it was kind of a haphazard process and not something that we really had like a very set sort of methodology towards. I guess, as far as development goes today, the way we do it is we have two UX designers, and what they do, Jeremy kind of does everything, but we have a UX designer, and what the guys do is they'll come up with kind of a graphic design mock-up of an interface that that they would like to see in the application. And then initially they didn't know anything about Unity. They came from pure UX graphic design, mobile app background. So we've had them kind of learn Unity. And that's really useful, because what we used to do before is we'd have a developer here kind of, basically, making small tweaks to the UI. Then, those guys would be like, oh, actually, let's try this. And there was a huge sort of turnaround time between, making the tweaks, getting it approved or, tested out by the designer who has the ultimate call on it. That was super inefficient. So now we actually have our designers, do the UX design, do the mock-up in Unity, play around with all the different settings, the animations. And then we have our developers, our engineers actually build that out. I don't know if that's, if that answers your question, but that's kind of the development process we use. We're not developing towards one specific goal. And so we're constantly trying new things in our application. So, it's not like we have a release date for the application. It really depends on which broadcasters we partner with and what their deadlines are and what their requirements for the application are. Yeah, so how are you making it social and voice over IP? Are there libraries or plugins or any recommendations? Yeah, so when we first started off, we Converge VR. So these slides are going to be available later, and at the end, in the last page, there's a resources section that explains the 2 documents that we initially followed to kind of get started on multiplayer, and we're using the Photon networking library. So it's been very easy and fast to set up. As I mentioned, I don't know if it's actually something that we'll be using long term. That's something we're working towards figuring out at the moment, but it's a great sort of first step towards understanding social. I do believe Unity has their own sort of networking solution as well. It was a little rough when we first started, so we didn't go with that, but it might be something that that might be worth exploring at the moment. And you mentioned VoIP. There is another solution out there, called DF Voice, that didn't really do what we wanted it to do. So we ended up taking external sort of solution, another solution, and kind of using that in Unity. I think what we're going to be doing is we found latency issues, and so we're actually going to be building our own sort of VoIP system inside the application. Is it hard to get a VR app into the Play Store? Unfortunately, we have never published an app to the Play Store. All of our apps have been internal demos and PR demos for clients. But from my understanding, it's actually fairly simple. Play Store is really fast. The App Store takes longer. You should be able to get something on the Play Store within a day or 2, I presume, unless I'm mistaken. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure about what the requirements for the Play Store are for a VR app just yet. What is the size of your app? Unity is large footprint. That is correct. The biggest issue with our app is that we kind of our 3D models that we build. The suite that we showed you in the video is customized per client, and right now we actually have all of those 3D models and textures that are inside the app. What we're going to be doing is when we work with the different clients, we're going to have it set up such that we actually just download those models on the fly. So the app itself is going to be fairly small. When I say fairly small, I would say about 20 megs or something like that, maybe less. I'm just ballparking it right now. Right now, our app is about 100 megs because we have all these assets in there that just don't get used by every instance of the app or every broadcaster. When do you expect live VR soccer to reach our living room in Europe? Hopefully this year. We are trying we're trying hard to kind of get some deals going. It's going to start regionally with different broadcasters. So, if you do something in the UK, it's going to be for the UK clients. And hopefully, let's say we do something with Sky, it's going to be for Sky UK. And hopefully we'll kind of move over to other, Sky in other countries, just as an example. But hopefully 2016. Comparing Livelike versus NextVR, which experience is more engaging? Well, I mean, I am a little biased because I developed Livelike, and NextVR is our competitor. I think there's pros and cons to both. NextVR, honestly, if you guys have never tried it out, is an amazing 360 live streaming solution, right? If you look at some of their experiences, some of them are not as interesting because if you have users, or if you have, the stuff you're filming really far away, then 3D doesn't really help. But for example, if you look at the boxing game, which happens right in front of you, right in front of the camera, it's really, really cool. And they have really good streaming and compression technology for 3D. The problem that we find here at Livelike, and actually the reason we started this company, is that we realized that, you put it on, you put on the headset, and just watching a pure video is kind of really cool the first time you do it, but it's not something that's going to make you watch the whole game for 2 hours, right? And it's not something that'll make you kind of come back every day to watch your favorite game, right? Or maybe not even every day, but every other day, or several times a week, right? And so the reason we kind of started Livelike, and the reason we're doing what we're doing right now, is because we want to kind of solve the problem of what is it that sports fans care about when they're watching a game. It isn't just purely video for the most part, right? There's other things out there. For one, they care about watching a game or enjoying a game with their friends. For another, or I guess I should say we, right? Another is that, we like to, look up, videos and whatnot of past sort of, highlights of the game that happened before and whatnot. And so there are several other things, and it differs by sport. So every sport is different. You can't create the same experience for soccer and expect that experience to translate over for tennis. And that's kind of really what we're going after. That's, I believe, what differentiates us. That being said, our system is camera agnostic. So, we're actually working with other 3D streaming companies out there so that, you saw the goalpost camera. That doesn't have to be developed by us. That could actually be something that's set up by a third-party provider like NextVR. And we simply have the user experience layer on top of that. Is it hard to, no, okay, yeah. So someone else answered is it hard to get a VR app into the Play Store? The answer is no, not at all, just a registration fee. Very few experiences of NextVR is 360. Most are not even 180. It's less than 180 in many of the experiences. Yep, exactly. NextVR has, like I said, great 180 3D streaming, and that's kind of what they've really focused a lot of their efforts on. Will you release an SDK, or will that be a beta alpha program? Unfortunately, like I mentioned, we kind of work with broadcasters. We don't own the rights ourselves. And it's not a game we want to get into. I mean, NFL rights get sold for $7 billion per year. So we're not going to bother with trying to buy those rights and compete with a Fox or CBS or whatever. So we go through broadcasters, and so what that means is that you should, hopefully, if you're a subscriber to Sky or some other, broadcaster, you will be able to use our application by just you download the Sky VR app that's powered by our platform. And hopefully, that's something that'll be coming out soon. Will you show sports in 3D? The answer is yes. As I mentioned, we're kind of focusing on the user experience side of things right now. We are looking into kind of our own, we have our own streaming technology that, our platforms that we use. We're also making it camera agnostic. So in the future, we will be able to, integrate third-party 3D streaming solutions providers in our application. We already do that for 360, by the way. So 3D is just kind of the next step as far as that's concerned. Let's see, did I miss someone? The gentleman asking about Play Store. Okay, let's see. With Fisheye lens, does the broadcaster need dedicated cameras for Livelike? The answer is yes. We are not using any different cameras. We're using the same cameras that they already use. So, off-the-shelf sort of Blackmagic or Red cameras, or Sony, I think it was F55 was what we used for the last game. The main difference is that we put a wide-angle lens on it. And so that fisheye lens or wide-angle lens, depending on the scenario, that's something that we're going to have to provide the broadcasters with. But everything else, as far as the encoders, the CDN, and everything, is something that's pretty standard and something that broadcasters already have. So, we depending on the situation, we might end up using their cameras, their encoder CDN, or for tests and stuff, we end up using ours for kind of the initial setup. Do you have plans to expand to other areas other than sports? I mean, we believe that sports is going to be a really, really huge market, and there's going to be one company that really capitalizes on at least the user experience application, or at least we'd like that to be the case. And so, I forget the actual numbers behind it, but I think sports was apparently, according to analyst expectations, probably going to be the third biggest sort of, or I think second or third biggest sort of market for VR by 2025. And so we are after games and porn or something like that. So we sports is something that we're kind of looking to nail, and we are razor focused on solving this vertical. What lens do you use? Unfortunately, I don't know the actual lens manufacturer. It really depends on sort of the game, right? So if you're in soccer and you want to capture the whole field, you're going to have to use a much lens with, I guess, a much lower focal length, right? Whereas for tennis, you have a much smaller court, so you can use something a lot lower. And if you're shooting tennis from the side, it's going to be different from if you're shooting it from behind the players. The standard tennis broadcast view. So it really depends. We render equipment depending on the event in the game. It could be anywhere from like 15 mm to like 24 mm lens. Have you considered tested environments showing multiple games at the same time, like in a sports bar setting? That's something we're looking to do. There is a big problem with that we kind of have to tackle and figure out how to tackle. And we have some interesting ideas about how to do that internally that we haven't really released yet, which is that the problem is that you can, on a mobile device, you have, a hardware decoder that decodes video, so you don't have to decode it on the CPU. And it can only handle one video. So if you want to actually decode multiple videos, like play multiple videos, one is going to go on the hardware decoder, but the other videos are going to go on the CPU. And it's, I mean, as you can imagine, it's going to be really, really processor intensive. It's going to really affect the frame rate. And in our case, we're talking about like high res, UHD or HD video, right? So it's something that's kind of been a challenge, and we're looking into different ways to do that. I haven't tried using low res video, so if you tried something that's like 480p or something, several of those videos, I'm not sure what exactly would happen, but worth a shot. Our FOV is 193. Okay, so the person who said what lens you use, or FOV that is 195 degrees, I think it ends up being anywhere from 120 to I think 150 or 160, something like that. I don't think we've ever used 180 on any production. How do you resolve occlusion? Could you elaborate on that? As in two players crossing. I'm not sure what you mean by that either. Yeah, if you could just elaborate on that, that would be great. What is your personal favorite VR headset? Even though I'm in VR, I unfortunately never, got to try out a lot of headsets till recently. The headset I hadn't tried out till recently was the Vive. Everyone on my team had tried it, but I just, for some reason, ended up missing every opportunity to do that. And we just ended up getting a couple of those, I think like last month or 2 months ago, and it is insane. For people who've never tried it out, it's kind of full room scale positional tracking, one-on-one tracking. So try it out. It's kind of like a game changer in some ways for that sort of VR, for tethered VR experiences. It's been around for a while, but I kind of only recently tried it out. I'm thinking rugby scrums are a problem. I'm not really as knowledgeable about rugby, so it might be something you might have to elaborate on. Say the game is at night. What is lighting in the suite? Unfortunately, right now we don't do dynamic lighting in the application. It's too expensive, and it's not something that really buys us all that much. So the lighting, we have to adjust cameras as the day goes on, right? So if you're doing a multi-day, full day event, we have to adjust the actual settings on the cameras. As far as the lighting in the suite is concerned, we kind of pre-bake it at the moment. And so it's not something we modify on the fly. It is something that we've kind of spoken about, but we kind of, the way we do it, we're like, okay, we're going to have a game that's going to be at 3 p.m. on Saturday. And so we'll just kind of, create the lighting scenario for that and build that into the application. Longer term, we're actually going to be downloading these images and models from our backend instead of packaging it inside the application. So you'll be able to kind of buy your own 3D suite or kind of, have broadcaster sponsored suites. If you're a fan of Manchester City, you'll be able to have, Manchester City suite that you could kind of have inside the application. Are you focusing only on live events? I can imagine a lot of people wanting to see highlights. Yeah, so we actually do highlights as well. So we do live events. And after the live event, we kind of, edit the footage, and we do provide highlights of past games inside the application. Looks like we're almost out of time, but I think we're out of questions as well. So last question. So several players being tracked, and there's a tackle or something, they merge in the tracking, then come apart again. There must be some tracking errors. So we don't actually do any tracking at the moment. Yeah, so we don't actually, I'll just answer that last question. We don't actually do any tracking ourselves at the moment. We are doing, so not in the application, but we are doing player tracking on our backend using third-party systems that actually have been built for this. For example, Opta Stats Provider actually has their own sort of tracking solution. So we end up using that, and I mean, their solution is kind of state of the art. So what we do is we'll take 2D coordinates and then kind of convert it into UV coordinates inside our application. Hope that answers everything. Anyhow, thanks, guys. It was a pleasure talking to you guys. And I have not. I will join the Facebook group, and I will see you guys there. Have a good evening.